On Egypt's Aswan Plateau, archaeologists broke into a sealed shaft nobody knew existed and found children mummified 3,000 years ago with resin reserved for pharaohs. What they uncovered would force a rethink of who mattered in the ancient world. Securing a permit from the Supreme Council of Antiquities is never routine, especially when the coordinates point to 22.02 degrees north, 31.42 degrees east, deep into Egypt's western desert, hours from the nearest settlement. Dr. El Shabroui led the convoy, paperwork stamped 2003-08 in hand, as the team set out before dawn. The route was nothing but 4 hours of rutted sand and wind-scoured rock, with the landscape growing emptier at every mile. The convoy carried not just excavation tools, but satellite maps and GPS receivers, each essential for navigating a region where even the smallest error could mean missing the site entirely. At the destination, a cluster of shallow depressions barely broke the surface, invisible to all but the trained eye. Every step forward depended on that single slip of paper, a permit that authorized not only the dig, but the chance to rewrite what was known about Egypt's dead. El Shabrawiy's leadership and the authority of the permit turned a barren stretch of desert into the most promising archaeological target in the region. A 5 by 5 meter grid was staked out across the burial ground, each square precisely measured and logged by survey technicians with GPS receivers in hand. The entire site became a matrix, every artifact and bone fragment assigned a unique code tied to its exact location within the grid. This system, borrowed from geoarchaeological methods used in Egypt's central desert, allowed for centimeter-level accuracy when mapping the burial shafts and shallow depressions. Above, a drone flew systematic passes, its camera programmed for 80% forward and 75% side overlap, capturing hundreds of high-resolution images under the desert sun. These digital photographs, later stitched together with photogrammetry software, produced a detailed three-dimensional model of the site, down to the undulations of sand and the faint outlines of burial pits. The workflow left little to chance. Every stage, from ground markings to drone flights, was logged and cross-checked, creating a permanent digital record. This rigor ensured that the fragile context of each child burial would survive long after the desert winds erased the trenches themselves. Desert sand in this region maintains a relative humidity below 10%, forming a natural desiccant barrier that draws moisture out of organic material almost as soon as it is buried. This extreme dryness, measured during excavation with compact hygrometers, is relentless. Bacterial decay stalls before it can even begin, but the preservation goes beyond what the climate alone can achieve. Spectroscopic analysis, using Fourier, transform infrared, FTIR methods, revealed sharp absorption peaks at 1,735 and 1,510 inverse centimeters in residues scraped from the child wrappings. These peaks correspond to oxidized resin compounds, confirming the presence of a plant-based sealant applied at the time of burial. The resin, blended with beeswax and bitumen, forms a hydrophobic film that repels even rare desert moisture, locking tissues in a near anaerobic cocoon. Isotopic signatures, delta values, matching local terebinth and imported pine, trace the resin's origins and suggest deliberate selection for durability. Together, the sand's desiccation and the engineered resin layer halt decay, creating a microenvironment where even ancient DNA can survive, ready for analysis millennia later. Inside the Max Planck Institute's Ancient DNA Laboratory, Dr. Sarah Collins prepared to test the limits of what the desert and resin had preserved. Every step took place in a sterile, clean room, pressurized and filtered to keep out the faintest trace of modern DNA. Teeth and hair roots from the child burials were ground under liquid nitrogen, then processed with silica-based buffers to coax out genetic fragments. The challenge was immense, because ancient DNA often arrives in pieces, degraded by centuries of heat and time. Yet when the first sequencing runs came back, the results were unmistakable. More than 12% of the DNA was endogenous, a figure considered exceptional for Egyptian remains. The mitochondrial haplogroup, MYA, surfaced in every child, a lineage that links these burials to populations once clustered in the ancient Near East. Analysis of genetic markers revealed close kinship. 2 children were first-degree relatives, likely siblings, and others showed second-degree ties. These findings, drawn from a workflow that included double-indexed Illumina libraries and bioinformatic pipelines, transformed the burial ground from a collection of isolated graves into evidence of a family network. For the first time, the laboratory could confirm that these children were not strangers but kin, bound by blood and ritual, their stories encoded in the very molecules that survived 3,000 years of desert silence. Gold foil beads, strung on fine linen thread, lay nestled beside the small bodies, their surfaces catching the last rays before the tomb was sealed. A carnelian necklace, its orange-red stones polished smooth, circled the neck of one child, a material more often reserved for the tombs of high officials. Nearby, a copper bow, no longer than a finger, rested at the edge of a woven tray, its form echoing the weapons of adult burials, but rendered as a toy or symbol. Among these tokens, a scarab carved from pale faience sat pressed into the palm of another child, its underside incised with protective signs. Each object, from the smallest bead to the largest amulet, was chosen with care, creating a burial kit that speaks to both affection and ritual. The arrangement of jewelry and playthings hints at a world where childhood was honored, and the afterlife imagined as a place where familiar comforts might endure. Imported pine resin, once reserved for royal embalming workshops at Deir el Medina, now turns up in these remote child graves, far from any palace. Chemical signatures match those used by craftsmen serving the pharaoh, yet here they seal the bodies of children in a desert outpost. This diffusion of elite technology, confirmed by resin isotopes and trade route evidence, dissolves the old boundary between royal and commoner. The presence of such materials outside the palace walls demands a new model of social hierarchy, one where prestige goods and funerary knowledge traveled well beyond the court, reshaping how status and belonging were negotiated across Egypt's farthest reaches. Ancient graves, once hidden now, force us to reconsider who mattered in Egypt. As new science rewrites old hierarchies, even silent remains demand we question what we think we know.